look up to someone like Adolf Hitler?
Of course we look up to men like Adolf Hitler. We look up to him as inspirations for what we can achieve.
Also inspired to follow Heimbach here, some who prefer to remain anonymous.
Well, I'm a Baptist preacher, so I gotta maintain a low profile.
Alright, so what you're about to see is a bunch of so-called white Christians exposing themselves as white supremacists. Please don't be fooled. I mean, this is not something that I take lightly, nor should you. Let's just play the clips so that you can see the truth.
But anyways, the problem is that on top of the fact that you did have this objectively evil institution of slavery, the vast majority, a good number of slave owners would have probably been very good Christians, very nice people, and you would have had a lot of slaves who were assholes, and you would have had a lot of abolitionists who were assholes and great people as well. The point is to say that you have people that may have been doing bad things, but they could have also been capable of doing great things. Again, the best example of this is Robert E. Lee, who I don't remember if he owned slaves or not. I think he freed his slaves, and he was personally opposed to the institution of slavery. And
Robert E. Lee participated in slave hunts. So how was Robert E. Lee a good person if he participated in hunting down slaves like they were game, foxes, and dogs? This Christian thinks that slavery is good for black people. Let's check out this next dude.
With both sides of the debate here. You know, 25 years ago, almost to the day, it was actually August 17th, 1992, Pat Buchanan made an incredibly insightful comment in his primetime speech at the Republican National Convention, where he said that there is a religious war going on in our country for the soul of America. It's a culture war as critical to the kind of nation we will one day be as was the Cold War itself. Profound and powerful statement. I think it's especially apropos here with the removal of Confederate statues. By the 12th century, slavery in Europe was virtually non-existent. Now, why did slavery revive? It is a complicated answer, but one part is that it came back largely through a theology of nature. It was during the period of colonization, and it became increasingly believed that God had ordained an order to the world, and that natural order included tribes, tongues, and ethnicities arranged in a hierarchical fashion. So it was believed by Europeans and American elites that this natural order involved a division of labor where certain ethnicities were ordained to rule while others were ordained to labor. And while Christ certainly redeems the hearts of all men equally, this redemption just doesn't extend into the divinely ordained natural order until he returns. Those Confederate monuments are cultural artifacts that attest to the fact that these men believed fundamentally in a divinely ordained natural order of things with Christ at its center. Now, this cannot be said of Hitler. Can't be said of the Nazis. Can't be said of Stalin and the Bolsheviks. This can't be said of Pol Pot and Castro and Idi Amin or any other butchers that have littered human history. It can be said of Robert E. Lee. It can be said of Stonewall Jackson. It can be said of the hundreds of thousands of Confederate boys that were killed in combat. These men who believed that they were fulfilling a Christian calling over their lives in accordance with a divinely ordained natural order. And these monuments honor that fidelity. But they were sinful and wrong as devout and dedicated Christian men. And those monuments honor the fidelity of these men to their Christian calling that nevertheless included highly fallen, unfaithful beliefs and practices. And at the very least, those monuments demonstrate an empathy with such a condition. For it's in fact an emblem of us all. None of us are immune from such a fallen yet faithful state.
Except for minorities.
But the question sounded off on Facebook, and we've made our statements and said, you know, neo-Nazis are bad. Is what do we do to go forward and actually try to bring healing to our land? How do we, is there anything beyond just condemning racists?
And two, and this is probably even more important in my sense, is what, and this really is a painful thing to say, but what if we became friends with these people, right? What if we became friends with these lost souls who, and I'm not just saying white supremacists, become friends with people who are struggling with sin. Let's not, sit in our churches and have a holy huddle, but let's go into the world, meet people who either are super racist and are, have some detestable beliefs, and get to know them because they are still made in the image of God, and have empathy. Have empathy towards all people, right? The racist and the non-racist, those who look like us and don't look like us, and those who are hard to love. Those who are hard to love.
Because we have to consider, what are the roots of this hatred that we're seeing from the white supremacists? And I really think that it's rooted in fear. I think it's an irrational fear. A lot of these people, they're afraid that everything that they've known, everything that they love in life is being taken away from them by other races. And trying to understand, we're not trying to offer support to their hatred, but just simply trying to understand where they're coming from so we can better reach out to them.
So essentially, when we make these friendships with these people, and really with any people, friends that we make are all going to be sinful, and ultimately our call is to be missionaries into the world and speak Jesus into their life, and to speak the gospel, help them see how the gospel applies to whatever sin is prevalent in their lives. So for these people who are afraid of change in this country and are afraid of losing their whatever it is that they're afraid of, being white and whatever rights they think that they're losing, we need to help them realize, and this is a long-term solution, right? There's no quick solution, but we need to help them see how Jesus changes everything, how the gospel speaks to that fear.
So these guys believe that in order to end racism and white supremacy, you got to make friends with racists. You got to empathize with them and understand. These are so-called white Christians, millennials now, young white Christians. This is their plan of action. Let's listen to this next guy.
Because the Democrats, okay, if you look back at I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a scholar, and he pointed out that the slave plantation is very similar to the modern, ghetto, whatever you want to call it, the poverty-stricken areas where blacks live. And you can look it up through Dinesh D'Souza, because he's the one that made me aware of it. But basically, that it's very poor. Families are torn apart. There's a welfare system in that they're taken care of, and that, once again, quotes, taken care of, they're given welfare or whatever. But it's a whole system that keeps them sort of placated, but never to actually rise up and want to do things for themselves. Really, my main point of this whole thing is they're making the argument that, the church, especially the white church, needs to speak out on issues of racism. I don't think they use the word inequality, but it's pretty much in there, implied. And the whole issue circles around the fact that it's a problem of humanity, not a problem of white churches, because they talk about it like racism is a white problem. And that in itself is a racist statement. No, whites that only care about white racism is racism in itself. You should care about racism from, these these groups from like the Daily Stormer, the neo-Nazi alt-right, I don't know what to call it. I hear so many different things, but I think you understand what I'm saying. The KKK, which was a white group, but it was the terrorist wing of the Democratic Party. But also not be afraid to speak out against groups like Black Lives Matter.
That's the only thing that is going to change any of this. There is only one way to get back to and we never were there. You know, this country has always had its problems, from slavery to Jim Crow to the ugliness that is going on now. And now it's coming from both sides. I mean, in the past, it has absolutely been the downtrodden people of color, whether they were Native Americans, whether they were black people, whether they were, you know, whether they're Hispanic or whatever. But now we've got violence and evil and this stuff coming from both directions. We see racism coming both ways, and I won't call it reverse racism. When a minority hates white people, that's not reverse racism. That's just racism. To call it reverse racism makes it seem like it's just not a right thing. Well, it's okay to, racism is normal going one direction, but to come the other way, that's like reverse racism. And it's a racist comment in itself. Racism is racism. And that's the bottom line. But now we have this ugliness coming from both sides, and there's not truly a downtrodden side. That we've gotten to the point where we've got equal opportunities, but we've just got ugliness coming from both sides, from conservatives, from liberals, from blacks, from whites. We've got ugliness coming both ways, and the only solution is Jesus. The only solution is the gospel, for people to understand that they need a savior from their sin.
Point is instead of trying to focus on what wrongs have my group done, there is no group wrong. There's individual wrongs. The whole concept of social justice, that groups need to be held to group wrong, so flies in the face of justice and biblical ethics that if you can't see that, then I don't even know how to argue against it, because that's not a logical position. You know, the Bible talks about again and again that a person is not responsible for the sins of their father, that they're responsible for their own lives. And if we start to get away from this whole biblical concept of personal responsibility, that you have to answer for what you do and what you think and how you live your life, we're just going to fall into that whole concept of group justice and group identity. And that's what social justice is about. It's not about actual justice, which is about the rights and wrongs that a person have done. But social justice is about the concept of rights and wrongs that groups have done. And so, in a way, KKK members, neo-Nazi members, Black Lives Matter members, Metro members, they're all for social justice, because they all care about what groups have done, not what individuals have done. And so, you know, ultimately, I have to agree with Viktor Frankl, that ultimately in life, people are separated among the decent and the indecent. That it's not a matter of what group identity you have, but how you are as a person.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. Part 2 is coming. Don't be fooled.
Well, it doesn't make it's not going to make sense to an unbeliever when a Christian says, "I'm going to go befriend a racist."